Today, we meet Dr. Asher Siegelman. In addition to being a student of MEOR's founder, Rabbi Gershenfeld, he is a distinguished clinical psychologist whose journey from Emory in Atlanta to a PhD at the Catholic University of America has really shaped his incredible expertise. Asher specializes in suicide prevention and trauma, and more recently has dedicated his career to bringing that expertise to Israel. Welcome to Realizing Potential, where we explore self-actualization through the journeys, perspectives, and transformative insights of Jewish leaders across the globe. Dr. Asher Siegelman, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You've dedicated your life to an issue that's heavy and universal and really important, especially today. Can you tell our listeners a bit about who you are, what you do today?
So I'm a clinical psychologist, but my specialty is what is called clinical suicidology, and that's suicide prevention. But where I really end up focusing, which is not so common, not so prevalent with suicidologists, is suicide intervention. So I literally sit down with people who want to die. And I talk very, very directly about this desire and what we can do to actually team up and save their life, keep them from doing this, keep them from killing themselves. So with that in mind, the entire focus that I've put my attention into is developing really a full system of care for Israel. We made Aliyah just a couple of years ago, and there's not a whole lot here. Some professors would say that I'm being nice by saying that, and they would probably be more candid and say there's nothing here. Okay, there's just nothing happening. There's no institute. There's no care that's available. There's no safe place for somebody who is suicidal.
Why do you think that's the case? It's obviously something everybody is concerned about. It's definitely a topic in many communities, if not all communities at this point. People have touched some situation where it's come up, or even worse. What's the reason that it's taking so long for there to be something out there in the world?
I think, to be quite frank about it, I think it's really, really scary. I think for a clinician to sit down with somebody who might actually die on their watch. So there's two facets to that. And one is that they care so much about the person, okay, that they'll take it personally, right? It will affect you, right? If you're sitting with somebody and your whole objective is to save their life, and then they go ahead and die, it'll affect you. And then there's the legal side of it. Like, we can't gloss over that. The fact is that a person could end up facing malpractice litigation. Okay, and if the person isn't really clear about how to actually go about working to save this person's life, it's just like, wait, I don't know what to do. I can't just sit down with somebody like that. Send them to the hospital, okay? Because the hospital has malpractice insurance, and they can say, look, they were here and we did everything we knew to do, and that's it.
So how do you deal with that personally? First of all, the work that you've studied, the research that you've done, how effective have you found it to be? And then number two is, given that you are involved in this day in, day out, how do you cope with that?
So I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I was trained by quite literally one of the world experts in suicide prevention, guy at the Catholic University of America, is Dave Jobs. And he created a model, he created an intervention for treating people who are suicidal. And he has a ton of data to back up that it works, which is really empowering, because it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about how I'm feeling about it. Right? I don't have to believe in it. Right? I have data to back it up. But in other words, if I had to stand before a judge and a jury, so to speak, and defend myself, right? It doesn't work so well to be like, well, I felt like it worked. I really believed like it would work. right? Rather, I can say, like, here's the data. Here's the data that it works for veterans. Here's the data that it works for active duty military. Here's the data that it works for women and children, for
So,
teenagers, right?
so it's very powerful, meaning you found a method that can really help people.
Correct.
But now you are still a human being who's, as you mentioned, it's a difficult position to be in and day out.
Right.
You're, as the rest of us, are running around happy and totally ignoring any negative side that's like the undercurrent of what might be going on in people's lives. You're seeing it all day, and then operating in the world, running a family.
Yeah.
How do you work through that?
Yeah. So I think that a corollary of the idea that I just put forward in terms of having this mentor that I had is literally maintaining contact with him, with other colleagues who came from his training as well, being able to bounce ideas off of them, and specifically him. Like we have meetings on not a regular basis, but so to speak, I have him on speed dial, right? So if I have an issue that's really tricky, I know that I have a team behind me who who doesn't just support me, but who actually believes in me, right? Like he's the one who said, like, you're amazing, you've got this, right? I totally agree with what you're doing. Or here, make this adjustment. But it's extremely empowering to have, this expert in my corner who's always going to have way more experience than me,
Sure.
right? But having that is it's not just valuable; it's invaluable, right? It's critical. So that gets into also what I'm looking to offer to people here as well. So it's like, hey, you can get this training. I can train you. You can get it through this organization. But ultimately, I'm here. I can help you develop this feeling of empowerment as well.
So your goal now is really to bring this work to Israel and make sure that in Israel there's an established, not just a practice of your own, which I know you work with people individually, but it's really to build out a system of people that can really help address this issue and help people to stay alive, and also to work through. I know I've heard talk that you gave locally to the community. It's really to work through the pain and hopelessness that people are feeling. So let's go back. Can you tell us the story of the path that you took to get here? It's a very directed, very specific goal that you have, objective that you have, and you've dedicated your life to. How did you discover that? And then how did that path look?
Yeah. So in truth, I think I need to give credit where credit is due. I was 13 years old, and my mother gave me a book on trauma. Right? I was interested in the work she was doing. She was working with people who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and she gives me this book, and it was fascinating. I was just amazed by it. It was one of the leading forces behind developing one of the evidence-based treatments for trauma, and that's really what planted a seed in me of interest, right, in considering psychology. But it was really many years later that I ended up in Israel, and it ended up, seeing people who were suffering from trauma, right? It was not an unusual thing in this country, with whether it was terrorism or it was just military experience. So it kept on coming back to me, so to speak, even though that was probably a decade later, right, when I ended up in Israel. And what developed was this like insatiable desire to work with people and pursue psychology, and the truth is, it is what led me to leave and go back to the United States and pursue this field. Now, what ended up happening, which was very interesting to me, was that I knew, right, so to speak, I knew that trauma was going to be the focus, and I knew that I just wanted to be a therapist. But as I was learning and studying with people, I realized that, my professors told me, you need to go work with people. I need to experience being around people who are doing treatment. Well, trauma is my focus. So I went and worked with these trauma specialists. I was at Emory University. and it's a hub for trauma work. Okay, so there were these incredible people who were doing these fascinating things with veterans and with civilians, and that's really where I first started experiencing working specifically with civilians as well. Because the bulk of my understanding was that this was an issue that was really pretty much reserved for kind of war, right?
Mhm.
Like traumatic war experiences, right? Sounds kind of superfluous. Like, of course, war is going to be traumatic. But then I learned that, well, civilians can actually have terrible experiences as well, right? And terrible violence. But in this process of listening to professors and taking their guidance to go in and work with people, I ended up connecting with a mentor who was actually the president of the American Psychological Association. Okay, the truth is, what happened was, and I think this is a really critical piece for me in terms of reflecting back on how I went about pursuing the career that I ended up choosing, which was that I was very careful to make sure I was always listening to people who were more experienced than me, right? So your professor said, like, go get training, go work with these people. It's like, of course, that's what you do. How am I going to do that? And I'm ask them who they recommend, right? And even extending that beyond just my field, where I wasn't sure who to work with next. And the truth is, of all people, I asked the rabbi in my community, right, if he had any suggestions. They're like, why would he have suggestions? Like, he has no relevance to it. Doesn't. And what happened? He said that. I said, I don't know it. He said, but I know a guy, right? And there was a guy in the community who was also an academic and a religious guy. The truth is, he was the head of anesthesiology for Emory University. What does that have to do with psychology? And I was also asking myself that. And he said, listen, I don't know if he can give any help. He may have no ideas. But, ask him. And so I mustered up the courage just to ask him, because I did feel self-conscious asking somebody for advice who has no connection to psychology. And he was a very approachable person, and he was pleasantly warm. And he said, I don't know about your field. But I happen to have a friend, okay, who she doesn't really know who I am. And the truth is, I don't really know who she is, but she is the head of psychology for this hospital. It was a hospital in the city that was connected to Emory. Let me put you in touch with her. Okay, and that's exactly what she did, right? So Nadine Kaslow, so it was her name. And she took me under her wing, and he said, she's not religious, but she loves Jewish people. Okay, and she has a real there's a place in her heart for Jews. She cares about them. She herself is Jewish, and that's exactly what she did. She took me under her wing, and then during the time I was working with her, she was voted in as the president for the American Psychological Association.
Wow!
So she became, this incredible. She gained this venerable role, right, in the field.
Yeah.
And then she didn't just write me a letter of recommendation, right? But it was just so touching. She basically interviewed everybody that I'd worked with and wrote this glowing letter of recommendation for me. And she also, in her lab, okay, while I was focused on trauma, she had this sub kind of focus, which was really reserved for the people who, so to speak, were the most traumatized. Okay. Why? How did that manifest? They were suicidal. Okay.
Interesting.
And I was fascinated by that. And she said, I have this guy who I think you would really love working with. And I know you're trying to get into a PhD program. And by that time, right, throughout my career at Emory, I learned that it's great to be a clinician, and that is what I want to do. I want to do therapy, but there's something really powerful also about being a researcher, being able to write papers, being able to educate other people. Okay, and that all came along with doing a PhD. Right? because I never considered that. It's like, why would I do things that I'm not really interested in? So throughout this experience at Emory and being in university, I learned that it's actually really powerful. That's really important for people. Maybe I don't love it as much, but like that's not what's important. What's important to me is the commitment to help people, which developed into a commitment to save people's lives. So she connected me with this guy who is at the Catholic University of America, when he did end up becoming this amazing figure in my life.
Wow.
Much more than just a PhD mentor, right? But really a mentor. Yeah, he's not Jewish. He's actually Catholic, and he's a dad, and he's a husband. So really a role model, right, in every sense of the term, and somebody now who, again, this idea of empowerment, right? One of the times I spoke with him after my PhD was conferred, he said, "Okay, so now, up until now, you've been my student, and now you are my friend and colleague." So I appreciate that, Dave, but like I still consider you my mentor. And he's like, "No, we're friends. We're colleagues now, right,
Wow.
officially." Because I really look forward to being able to see you, develop the things that you're committed to developing and helping your people. Being in Israel, and he immediately just put me in touch with everybody you could think of in Israel who were colleagues of his, right, friends of
So
his.
it's interesting because this goes back to what you said before. You like how you cope with the work that you do is you have people in your corner that believe in you, and it's
Yeah,
interesting because it seems like that's the path that you've taken is finding people, um, building a good relationship with them, right? Being a positive influence for good, being dedicated to the path and clear on what you wanted to accomplish, right? In terms of helping people, and then allowing them to be on your team and to guide you and to continue to develop those relationships. But you just kept pushing forward, meaning each time you were asking them like, who can I meet with? Who can I and they continued to refer you on until you got to where you are today. So it's just very interesting. One thing that I know you didn't grow up like myself. You grew up not Orthodox, and then you decided at some point in this journey, and I actually don't know this, we're friends, but I don't know where this falls into the storyline. But at some point, you decided to go to Israel and to dive deep into studying Jewish Torah wisdom. Like how did you decide to do that, and how does it fit into the story of this timeline?
I think that it connects. It does connect back in a real way for me, in I guess in terms of this theme of seeking advice from people, being open to that advice, really listening, right? Really listening to people, and thinking about what they're saying, even if it's uncomfortable. And at that time in my life, I was in high school. I was, quite frankly, I was anti-religious. I knew that, well, Judaism was foolish, right? It had nothing to offer to anybody. But what happened was that I also realized that I actually didn't know anything about it, and that bothered me. It bothered me to take such a strong stand and say like, no, this is foolish, or this is not for me. And yet, ethnically, I was certainly identifying myself as a Jew. And it's not like I had formidable like experiences with anti-Semitism or anything like that. Although I did, I had some weird run-ins, right? Because I was this person who identified as a Jew, but I didn't necessarily care for it. And then people would say strange things to me that had me just scratch my head and wonder, like, why would they make a point of telling me that, keep in mind that I'm a good German, right? Like it was just like, what does that mean? We're in the United States, and I don't know, I don't even understand what to make of that. And so what happened was two, again, not religious people who I looked up to, who they themselves are Jewish as well. They said, when we got done with school, and these were in separate conversations, when we got done with high school, we went to Israel for a year. I went to Israel for a year. It was an amazing experience. And the truth is, it satisfied a couple of things for me. One was that it sounded like a great adventure, but more importantly, as I mentioned, I had this real issue with taking such a strong stand against something that I didn't understand. I didn't know anything about. So I was like, that's a really interesting idea. And these two people happen to be my closest friends. I was always closest with people who are significantly older than me. So I took their advice seriously. And I created a plan for myself to go to Israel for a year, and not to study anything religious, but just to go to Israel and study in university for a year, just to be in that environment. Because I figured, if I'm going to really experience Judaism, I might as well be where it all started. All right, that much I knew. I knew that there's some truth to that, historically. Like that's where it begins. So let me go there and see what happens. And I was very curious. I was just like, who are you? What's your name? As I'm learning Hebrew, it was, I would break my teeth, make a fool of myself trying to communicate with people. Certain people, it's amazing looking back at the evolution of my friendship with them. I started out by not being able to communicate with them at all. I had a translator. There's somebody who spoke English who you like translating so we could communicate. And now I speak Hebrew fluently. So it's just fascinating. They are these incredibly sophisticated, refined human beings who would stand very patiently and listen and, listen to the translation and then communicate back. And now we have this real relationship in their native language. But in that year, I guess really to your question in terms of the journey, I realized that, while being in Israel for a year was great, I was in university. I had these fascinating experiences with people because of the curiosity, right, that I had, and my interest in really listening to people, thinking about what they had to say, even if I didn't agree with it. Okay, I had long hair at one point, and I had a guy who was like, "You should cut your hair." So I was like, "Thank you, Jonathan. I'm not interested." But through that year, I realized, maybe I should stay another year. I should go and really investigate this specifically, right? Because again, I knew psychology was my focus, and so I'd been studying to commit myself to that trajectory academically. And I realized, that can wait. I'm 19 years old. I don't need to, rush, right, to go through school. So let me stop for a second. Let me take a year. And the truth is, my parents were largely, they were reluctant, but they understood also. Okay. Now I do that.
MEOR's vision is to create a vibrant Jewish future led by a new generation that is literate in Jewish wisdom, culture, and heritage, inspired by a deep personal identity, committed to strong Jewish values, and engaged in Jewish community, civic life, and support of Israel. You can find a link to donate in today's show notes, or head to meor.org/donate to help MEOR inspire, educate, and empower the next generation of Jewish leaders. And so you spent some time in Israel learning, and then did you come back? I believe you spent a long time in Israel after that, but at some point you come back to the States and study. I'm sure there's a whole story there. Maybe we don't have time to go into all of the details of it, but in terms of what you took from the time that you were there, or you were here, like how does it relate to the work that you do now and the life that you run now, in terms of psychology, your career? And does that overlap, or is it primarily a personal thing that doesn't get brought to work with you?
I think it would be a lie to say that it does not get brought to work with me. It's who I am. Right? It's my entire identity. I mean, gosh, what the time for me in Israel provided was an experience of really learning about who I am, why I'm here. I mean, not to get too religious, so to speak, but what does God want from me, right? And kind of provocative, but I think it's also an extremely powerful question to ask. It's like, what's going to be at the end of my life? Right? What do I want people to remember me as at the end?
What do you want people to remember you as at the end? I didn't warn you about that question.
I think it's a powerful question, though. And for me, it's moving because I think really what it is, he was somebody who saved a lot of people's lives.
Awesome. Okay, so
Yeah.
I want to take a step back to the work that you do today.
Mhm.
Um, I'd be remiss not to ask this, which is we have students, we have alumni, we have supporters, and others who are going to be hearing this, and there's a tremendous amount of wisdom that you've learned and practical advice, not just for people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, but the people around them, the communities, um, all over the world, really anybody. So, what do you think the most important thing would be for all of us to understand about suicide on one foot?
Mhm. I think our tendency as human beings is to, and I think it's natural, is to try to give advice to people, uh, because it feels like the right thing to do, and it makes us feel like we're doing something productive. Inherently, it keeps us from feeling uncomfortable. And it ties into what I'm going to say in terms of what is the most powerful thing to be able to do to help somebody, even if they're not suicidal, even if it's just about uh, providing them with something that very few people know how to provide, and that's really listening. That's slowing down and listening in order to actually understand what they're trying to communicate, and even test it out by vocalizing it back to them.
Hmm.
Hey, this is what I heard you say. Did I get that right? And stopping and letting them say back to you what they need to say, whether it's no, you missed it, or that's exactly right. You're just listening. And I say it's uncomfortable because what it requires is, uh, yes, slowing down, but silence. You actually have to stop and listen. And it's quieting down our own internal voice, which is like, wait, what's the next thing I need to say?
Hmm.
Right? Let me wait for him to get done talking so I can say what I need to say because it's really important. Right? And then I'll be talking. So really, if you think about it, the classic interaction is that you've got two people who are just constantly talking. I'm waiting for you to get done talking so I can talk. So I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. So I'm really just talking, not actually listening. Right? And then you finally stop talking, and now I'm talking. So in this model, it's like just stop. You're dealing with
Wow.
somebody who's suicidal, right? This is critical. Right? This is actually life saving.
Do you mind if I ask, like, what does that look like? I know one of the things I've heard you say, and it was very powerful for me because it's one of those things we're afraid of doing, which is that talking about suicide won't make suicide happen more.
Mhm.
The statistics don't support that, and that if somebody does seem down, asking them isn't going to cause damage.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you tell us about that?
So to be real concrete about it, right? There is a myth out there that if I bring up this idea specifically, or if I say like, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?" Okay, so if somebody is really suffering and they haven't thought about that, won't it make them think about it? They'll be like, "Oh gosh, that's a great. I didn't think about that." Which right, we laugh, but the truth is, I love the clinicians I've worked with, the researchers I've worked with. I haven't met bad ones. Like it's been a blessing. I've met fantastic researchers, and they took this question seriously because they wanted to understand, like, hey, is that a real concern we need to have? And they found no, it doesn't make people think about it. Okay, um, if anything, it actually relieves people who are thinking about it. I always share with people that, you know, I've had multiple interactions with suicidal people who have said, you're the first person who just came out straight to ask me that question directly. It's kind of refreshing because I feel like everybody else is just beating around the bush. They're like, so how bad does it get? Are you really depressed? Yeah, a lot of anxiety. Really what they're trying to say without saying it is, are you thinking about killing yourself? But again, it comes from this really serious fear that people have, right? Um, as I had highlighted earlier, right? It's like, well, what am I supposed to do if they do say yes? And that's legitimate, right? It's like you do need to get training, but you can also just listen, right? Like I said before, really just listen and slow down, because what I try to explain to people is that really what the person is saying when they say yes is, I am suffering this much,
Mm.
right? So you don't need to do anything. You need to sit with somebody who's suffering and just talk to them, really listen to them. Right? The talking is just vocalizing what they said, right? Not what you feel like you need to say. Just listen.
Wow, it's incredible. It's very important, and it's just counterintuitive to, like, for most of us, to not know
Mhm.
that and now know that. It can be extremely powerful, and I'm really happy you were able to share that. I know there's so much more, and at the end of the episode, I'll ask you to share your contact information so people can refer back to it if they
Mhm.
have questions for you, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Um, and if it's okay, I want to move on. I know there's so many more things we can talk about, but at the end of every episode, we ask three deep questions. So I want to jump into those. The first one is, and I promise I wasn't thinking about these while that's the good news about writing it down before, is I didn't have to think while you were speaking.
Okay.
Um, but what is your favorite piece of Jewish wisdom that's guided you in life?
I really do think it's this set of questions that I kind of mentioned, right? Like, who am I? Um, why was I brought into the world? What does God want from me? And what do I want to be remembered for? Um, I think in some way, in some shape or form, I was thinking about those questions even way before I was religious. That's what had me feel so unsettled. I was like, wait, what am I supposed to be doing in life? I actually don't think that's a rare question for people to be bothered by. Also,
Mm.
that's pretty. I'd be surprised if people aren't actually wondering about that, right? So consequently, they try to keep themselves really busy so they don't think about it, because, like, what's the answer to that question, right? Who am I? Why am I here? Right? At least those two.
Sure.
And it was, like, in learning it's something that I realized is actually an explicit set of questions, right? That the grades that our great scholars actually put a lot of emphasis on asking, right? Like reminding ourselves, like, yeah, ask yourself those questions. Even ask yourself those questions on a daily basis. Like, reflect on it, right? To keep yourself on track and focused.
Is there a process you use or an approach you use to, like, ask other than just asking the question consistently? Was there anything particular that you saw, or a system that you used to explore it?
I think it's been in, like, the recent months that I've come across some interesting teaching from Rav Kellerman, and the reality is that the approach that I take is based on these questions, but it's definitely focused on, how do I put it, my strengths, I guess.
Mm.
Right. I think a tendency for people is to sink into maybe at least a focus on faults, right? Where am I messing up? Okay, what am I not doing correctly? Um, and so I think that it's really critical. And the truth is, this comes from the psychological literature as well. Like, focus on building up your strengths. Right? Like, what are you really good at? What do you have a natural inclination for? Right? That's inspiring to you. Um, right? Have those kinds of things. Allow yourself to have those things in mind while you're asking yourself these questions,
Mm.
while you're contemplating these things, rather than who am I? I have no idea what's the matter with me. I don't, right? Which could be a terrible place to end up, right? As opposed
Mhm.
to, right, who am I? Well, let me think about what I'm good at. Right? I'm really wanting to answer that question. Let me think about what I desire to be good at. Right? What do I care about?
And for you, that was helping people and connecting to people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what I started noticing very powerfully. And the truth is, I had people who I looked up to all along the way, and the benefit of that, okay, I say empowerment, but to be more concrete about it, I remember having a concern when I was a teenager about pursuing psychology because I realized, like, you know what? Yeah, me and every other kid in university, right? It's like the most popular major, right? Like, great. How do I distinguish myself, among the myriad of individuals who are pursuing psychology? And the truth is, I remember at that time bringing that concern up to my mother, and she said, there are a lot of people who pursue this field, but she said, in truth, there are very few who are actually really good at it, though. Like,
Wow.
it's actually difficult to meet and find people who are really talented in this field, where they know what they're doing. So don't disdain if lots of people are pursuing it. Okay, because you have something unique to offer, right? So offer that, right? Give yourself. That's what people are going to respect and what they're gonna want.
It's powerful. Okay. The next question is, what's the best piece of advice? That was already a good piece of advice. But what's the best piece of advice or a really good piece of advice that you've been given?
I think again, it's a corollary of this whole theme that I'm mentioning around listening. But I do remember my first clinical training experience with my PhD mentor, Dave, um, and everything was video recorded. Okay, so he could actually watch what exactly I was doing and saying. Um, and I thought for myself, I was like, I felt so confident, and so good at what I was doing, and because I said all these really helpful things. And as he's watching the video, sitting with me, he's like, "Stop talking. Just stop talking." Right? He said, "Just pause. Say one thing, right? Like you said, you're feeling down, and just stop. See how long you can wait." It was actually a really painful experience. It's like super uncomfortable. Right? And it was uncomfortable for the other person also. I was watching this poor client of mine just like squirming in her seat. Like, I was like, what am I doing this for? This is terrible. Right. But the reality is what I was doing was opening up a space for this person to actually communicate. Okay. So that was powerful on several levels because it had me realize, like, interactions are not about me being comfortable. They're about providing what I need to provide to this person that's going to help them. And that might actually be really, really uncomfortable. Can you imagine sitting in front of somebody and you in some ways intentionally make them cry by what you're doing, but based on all the evidence that this is actually the thing that's going to help them. I'm not sitting there to try to get people to laugh, right? Just hang out and talk. Right? To actually help them get better, okay? Actualize the best form of themselves. Right? And I think that there are other corollaries of this as well, where even with Rabbi Gershenfeld, my interactions with him have always been really watching him do this for me. right? And the truth, I didn't have words for it until I became a doctor, right? It was before I became a doctor. It was during my training, right? That I realized like, oh, wow, that's what he always did. That's what he always did with me, right? He would give me this profound space to be able to communicate and really express myself. And he would just listen. He wasn't trying to talk. He wasn't trying to tell me to do something. Right? Even in the interactions where I expected him to tell me to do something, he didn't. At the most, he might say like, "Please be careful," and then he would qualify that. Like, what does that mean to be careful? Right? Like, take care of yourself spiritually, right? Make sure that you don't become desensitized. Make sure that you're still caring about other people, right? Whatever it might be that he qualified it with. And the truth is that I do remember feeling uncomfortable in those interactions sometimes because he was listening. And it's like now I look back and realize like, oh, that's why. That's why I was so uncomfortable, because he was listening. And that was rare, right? But extremely powerful.
Wow. Okay. Incredible. I have so many more questions, but for the sake of time, we're going to stick with the last one, which is, what do you think is the key to realizing your potential?
I do really believe that it's these questions that I presented, right? Who am I? Why am I here? What does God want from me? What do I want people to remember me as, right at the end? But I think related to that is really taking time to listen to yourself. Okay, what do I mean by that? It's like noticing what your strengths are, noticing what you are aspiring to do. And beyond that, I think where we might get hung up sometimes as people is we'll kind of stop there. Be like, well, this is what I figured out. This is what I'm going to do. I've worked it out. But then be closed down to what somebody else might have to offer. Like I had shared with the chief of anesthesiology, right? Like, why would I bother talking to somebody like that? He doesn't know my field, right? Before I was in a doctoral program. And he was actually the person I needed to talk to, right? He was the person to talk to. Right? The rabbi I spoke to didn't know if he would be, right? But my point being that really being open to listening to what other people have to say, even if I mess up, right? I remember that as well. Like, you make a mistake, and instead of just trying to figure out like, wait, where did I go wrong? It's like, do that too, but then go to people who are the experts. I remember applying to PhD programs and I didn't get in. Okay. And I was uncomfortable doing this, but I emailed everybody that I'd applied to work with. I think like 80% of them actually responded, and it gave me time on the phone to talk through my application. And I literally asked them what was missing that would have had you choose me. I know you're having a really hard time because there are tons of people applying to these programs. And the guy at Harvard got 100 applicants for one position. Okay. And I felt relieved when he told me like, your application was in the top of the pile, right? But it was one position. He said, quite frankly, Asher, like, if I was applying now, I wouldn't have gotten in. But it was so helpful because here it is. Like, I think I know what I'm supposed to be doing to improve my chances of getting into these programs. But so think about it. I'm applying to work with a specific individual. So let me ask that individual, like, hey, what are you looking for? Right.
So you're really seeing the person like that you're working with here. You're not, as you said, like, you're listening and not just trying to accomplish something, but recognizing who you're interacting with and who you need to work with and who needs to be on your team in order to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. For me, it was like the takeaway was like, okay, I can do everything I know to do, but what would happen if I then add to that everything these experts advise me to do also? that's a whole other level of, personal work, right? Like it's like, no, here's what I figured out what I need to do, but what do you think I need to do?
Is it just when you get advice, right? I'm imagining a lot of different people might have given you advice, and you've mentioned the ones you've listened to and followed. Is there any skill also necessary in terms of sifting through that and figuring out what is right and what's wrong in terms of the
Mhm.
advice you might receive?
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely think so. And the approach that I took to that was really focusing on the themes that showed up between each person that I talked to. Because,
Mm,
like I said, I'd applied to work with, let's say, 15 different people, right? So, listen, I had one guy who was not a pleasant person to talk to, and he was just, well, you got this wrong, and there's this wrong, and there's that, and you don't have this, but he was the only person who said any of that. And so, quite frankly, I just dismissed it. I was like, okay, that's not valid. That's not valid data, right? Because I have 10 people who are saying, yeah, you did this right. You did this right. Here's something that you can tweak and do it this way.
mm.
Okay. So I was able to collect that data by talking to multiple people and recognize, like, okay, so here's where I should put my energy, because I have 3 or more people, let's say, who are saying the same thing, right? Like, you're really interesting, but your experience is kind of all over the place. Like, it doesn't seem so focused, right? It's like, okay, so that's a theme that's showing up among all these people. And let me focus myself, just on this experience that I'm claiming I want to pursue as a doctoral student.
It's interesting because so just to maybe summarize that process, which is very powerful. Step one, identify the experts, identify the people that are most likely to potentially have advice, even if they might not be totally relevant, but they seem like they would be a good idea to speak to.
Yeah.
Step two is speak to them. Step three is to take the advice and cut out the outliers. It's like a very statistical approach to advice. And then the last step is to follow it, to actually take action.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's well said. That's why I would like working with you sometimes now.
I'm really good at taking other people's wisdom and just spitting it back at them and sounding really great.
But that means you're good at listening. It's exactly
Uh,
right? You listen, you understand, and then you vocalize it.
Great. Okay. Well, the last piece I just want to make sure we cover, which is how do people get in contact with you? You're doing incredible work here in Israel, but also, in general, just the expertise that you have, both for other people who are looking to get into this career, and also other people who know people who need help in this world. Um, how do they get in contact? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
I think it's through email is probably ideal, I guess.
Great.
I
So
guess you
what's your
can.
email? And I'll also include it in the show notes just so other
Yeah,
people.
that's a great idea. Yeah, I was gonna see if there's a way I can cleverly just make it pop up on my screen.
I'll work that one out.
Yeah, that's great. That's it. sos.basher@gmail.com. All right.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Hopefully, maybe we'll have you on again.
Mhm.
But this was very enlightening, and I know will be very helpful to the audience from a lot of different angles. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.